So, welcome back. On to chapter 2. And by on to chapter 2, I mean I'm skipping the introduction. Because, yeah, this is before the table of contents and some other... It tells you the whole story. You don't need to know this. If anyone ends up watching this and you really want to know, absolutely hit me up. I'll read it for you at the end. Alright. So there's our contents of illustrations. Now, Headhunters of the Amazon, Chapter 1, The Beginning of the Trail. Excuse me, cheers. Oh, that's better. The genesis of this story of my wanderings in the Amazon country lay in a letter I received one autumn morning when I was in Elmira, New York. I give it as it reached me. Quito, September 30th, 1894. Mr. Fritz W. Updegraff, Elmira, New York. My dear Fritz, you cannot imagine how glad I was to receive your letter. As I was in Riobamba at the time it had reached this place, it did not come to my hands but some days after. Well, you are an electrical engineer now, are you? I thought you still were engaged in the canning business over in Chicago, so I must confess I was surprised when I read your letter proposing all sorts of electrical business. Now I must let you know that life in the forest is not very enjoyable and has a number of unpleasant things that are in connection with it. No society is to be found there, no such amusement as shows and the like either, and one can only be there to work. And if one is enterprising and hard-working, it is a sure thing to get a good remuneration after a time. This country is composed of very indolent people, and I can assure you that though there are no possibilities of making the fabulous fortunes that are made in the States, yet it is much easier here than there to make a handsome capital. The country is backward, very backward, and there is an opening in almost every line. As I told you when in the States, the climate of the interior is extremely pleasant and healthy, while that of Guayaquil is unhealthy to most people. However, I have been in perfect health in both. It is now your turn to decide. If you decide to come, it is better to do so immediately, before winter begins. Let me know at once the date of your arrival in Guayaquil, and I will arrange that you will have no difficulties when you get there. Hoping that I will see you soon, and that this finds you now in perfect health. I remain yours in the bonds, E. Domingo Cordobes. I had made the acquaintance of D. Enrique Domingo Cordobes, known among his friends as the Count, at Union College, Schenectady, New York, in the year 1890. He was among the many rich young South Americans who came to the United States to take advanced courses at the universities, chiefly in the field of engineering. Due to their natural temperament and the superabundance of cash which they bring with them, many of them find a course of regular studies irksome, but turn to the lighter side of life as a duck turns to water. No comparisons there. Generally, at the end of their first term, or more often at the end of the second, they are called before the faculty meeting, where it is pointed out to them, gently but firmly, that their forte is not the particular branch of study which they have chosen, and that in their own interest, as well as that of the faculty, they would be well advised to withdraw their names from the college register. But having come so far with the intention of taking a 4 years course, they do not embrace with any marked eagerness the idea of returning home. In every college town, there is at least one printer who furnishes, for from £5 upwards, the price depending upon the size and quality of the sheepskin, the number of seals, and the length of the signature, far finer diplomas than those issued by the colleges themselves. To these artists, the South American gentlemen go at the end of their 4 years, unless they decide to stay on for a postgraduate course in the arts to which they have devoted their attention. Finally, they return to their homes, armed with degrees which will give them a high standing in their native countries. At least they have learnt English, a big asset in South America. The Count was, however, an exception to the rule. The son of a wealthy Ecuadorian, he was actuated by a very real desire to return to his native land equipped with the technical knowledge which would enable him to install in its primitive towns some of the many modern conveniences which were sadly lacking. And so it came about that his more serious nature and his real love of his work enabled him to graduate with honours as a civil engineer. I kept in touch with Cordobez after I left college, and later he came to see me at my home. There, we finally decided that I would go down to Ecuador as soon as he had had a chance of examining the business possibilities of our proposed ventures, for which he was to find the money and obtain the concessions on arrival home. In those days, the streets of the capital of Ecuador were lighted by means of candles placed by householders in their front windows. There was certainly room for improvement in Quito. So it came about that in October 1894, I received his letter asking me to confirm our agreement. It did not take me long to come to a decision. Stanley's Through the Dark Continent had inspired me as a boy with a determination to go off into the unknown world, which lies beyond the confines of civilization, offering a life brimful of adventure to him who had penetrated its depths. Adventure! That was the keynote of my life, the note to which my youthful, untamed spirit vibrated in sympathy. Here was my chance, then, to South America, with its vast tracts of unexplored territory, holding heaven knows what strange secrets. I would go. On November 18th, 1894, I sailed from New York in the SS Advance of the Old Ward Line, bound for Panama via Colon, with $100 in my pocket. In 10 days, we made the Colombian port after a voyage which was, I suppose, as uneventful as any other, but which was for me a great adventure. I was on the way to my goal. Colon struck me as being a town of turkey buzzards and niggers. Both turned out in large numbers to watch the arrival of the SS Advance. I had not much of a chance to see the town, a mere collection of thatched roofs grouped round the wooden wharves, half hidden by the palms and banana plants which grow in profusion. Situated in the middle of a swamp, with muddy lanes for streets and buzzards in place of sewers, it was a wholly unattractive place. I boarded a train on the landing pier, which was taken across the isthmus in about 2.5 hours, passing a series of small country towns, much the same as Colon itself, and having frequent glimpses of the old de Lesseps Canal. The abandoned machinery still lay where it had been left by the French, rotting in the mud and water, tropical growth sprouting from the stacks in the steam shovels, their great boilers half hidden in the tangled mass of rank weeds. It was a dismal spectacle. Arrived at Panama, I wrote home on December 12th, 1894 from the Grand Hotel, the only one the town boasted. It described itself on its letter paper as situated in the Parque de Santa Ana, the most central point of the city, and at the same time the healthiest. A first-class restaurant, splendid bedrooms for travellers and transients, cup and ballroom. In reality, dirt, bugs, and an absolute disregard for the decencies of life as we understood them were the outstanding features of that hotel. The sanitary arrangements were novel in the extreme. The proprietor, with an eye to business, had made a special show of the modern plumbing which he had installed, probably in advance of anybody else between Mexico and Argentine, for a row of cabinets was built across one end of the dining room, shielded only by little half-doors, permitting the occupants to continue their conversation with their friends who sat at table. The room was open on two sides to the street, with no protection of any kind from the naked children, buzzards, dogs, and pigs of the street, which trooped in and out in a never-ending procession in search of scraps. The splendid bedrooms, to which the letter paper bore witness, were so teeming with vermin that no proper impression of the state of things can be conveyed. I was not aware at the time whether it was the custom to mow the grass and weeds before showing a guest to his room, but at any rate, the proprietor of that hotel neglected to do so. The verdure was growing between the floorboards, to the height of at least a foot when I took possession of my room. I did a little weeding before bringing in my steamer trunk, and depositing it on the clearing which I had made. That night I slept on it, escaping the crawling creatures which lived in the bed, which would have had to risk being lost in the forest on the floor in order to reach me. The mosquitoes, however, were appalling. Mr. Sorsby, the American consul, was very kind to me. He gave me a good deal of friendly advice, for which I was very grateful. Many were the traps awaiting the young unwary traveller from the north. On my second evening in the town, he took me out to see the places of amusement, demonstrating, among other things, his skill at the Wheel of Fortune. In a very few moments, he broke the bank for 20,000 Colombian pesos. To the proprietor, who came and begged him to lend him half the money to restart the wheel, he put a leading question. "Would you," he asked, "have given me back half my money if I had lost a fortune to you?" He received no answer. I thought at the time that he was rather mean, but have since changed my mind. Next day, I was glad to board the SS Santiago of the Pacific Mail Line and see the last of Panama as we sailed for Guayaquil. After 48 hours sailing, we arrived at our destination. There were two outstanding features of the chief port of Ecuador which I think deserve mention: the sewage system and the Admiral. Mr. Dillard, the American consul, described to me the former as I was not staying long enough in the town to see it for myself, due to the prevalence of yellow fever and bubonic plague, and introduced me to the latter. The refuse of all kinds, instead of being carried away in drains, was thrown out of the upper windows of the houses onto the roofs of passing tramcars, which were surrounded by a special boarding a foot high. A fair proportion hit its mark. When the car arrived at the outskirts of the town, the deck cargo was dumped by the conductor. A leak in the roof of one of those cars must have been a serious matter. This system must be unique in all the world. We met the Admiral in a tavern, from which he had just ejected everyone else with the aid of a table leg, which he still grasped when we entered. His name was Brown, and he was from Pittsburgh. He was the navigating officer, chief gunner, and engineer of the Ecuadorian fleet, which was lying at that moment under repair in the harbour of Guayaquil. He was reputed to be the only man in the navy who could get back to land once he was out of sight of it, with the aid of a pocket compass which he carried. Nevertheless, he was not the man who wore the gold braid. The fleet was composed of a couple of gunboats known to the English-speaking residents as the Espera un poco and the Pasado Mañana. From Guayaquil, I went up the Guayas, a tidal river, to Bodegas, the greatest cacao collecting station in the world. It lies about 80 miles from the port of Guayaquil. Never have I seen such enormous numbers of alligators as those which lived along that river. The water seemed to be composed of mud and alligators. The mud bars were almost eclipsed by them. We ran over them and into them all the time. I was met by my friend Cordobes on the wharf of Bodegas, and so began my 7-year wanderings in South America.